A beggar with two children huddles on a busy street, invisible to the world around her. For hours she remains unnoticed, until one man halts in his tracks. A millionaire, powerful and untouchable, he stares at her, recognizing her instantly. Once, she had been the confident girl who had mocked him in school. Now she's a broken, desperate woman, unrecognizable in her suffering. What he does next is not just surprising, it's a bold, unthinkable move. Watch until the end to see how this story flips completely. Don't forget to leave your comments below to share your thoughts. Luke Bennett, a millionaire hardened by years of ruthless ambition, was crossing a busy street corner when something unusual caught his attention. A woman sat on the sidewalk, her clothes tattered, her hair disheveled, and in her arms were two small girls, twins no older than 4. One of them was quietly crying, rubbing her eyes with tiny, grimy hands. "It's okay, sweetheart," the woman whispered, her voice trembling with love and desperation. "Someone will help us soon." Luke's breath caught in his throat. Beneath the layers of filth, he recognized her. Emily Parker, the girl who once lit up his high school world. Back then, she had laughed off his awkward attempts to win her over, her confidence dazzling and seemingly unattainable. Now she was a shadow of that girl, broken, vulnerable, and a mother fiercely protecting her children, clinging to whatever strength she had left. His chest tightened as memories flooded his mind. Stepping closer, his polished shoes clicked against the pavement. "Emily!" he called. Her head lifted, and her eyes widened in disbelief. "Luke!" she whispered. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of memories neither dared to speak of. "What happened to you?" he asked, unable to hide the concern in his voice. Emily pulled her daughters closer, their small bodies pressing against her, as if for comfort. "It doesn't matter. We're fine. Just go," she said, her tone a mixture of defiance and fragility. Luke's gaze flicked down to the girls. One's stomach growled audibly, while the other clung to her mother, eyes wide with fear. "You're not fine," Luke said firmly. "Come with me." "I can't," Emily replied, her voice breaking. "I'm not leaving you out here in the cold," he insisted, his tone resolute. "You and the girls are coming with me. No arguments." The twins looked up at him, curiosity flickering through their uncertainty. Emily's lips parted to protest, but his steady, unyielding stare broke her resistance. She nodded faintly. Minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up, and Luke gently lifted one girl, Caroline, he would later learn, while Emily carried Alice. As the street faded behind them, they drove toward his mansion. Inside his sprawling estate, the warmth from a crackling fireplace filled the room. Emily sat stiffly on a plush sofa, watching her daughters devour a meal that Mrs. Amelia, the housekeeper, had hastily prepared. The older woman's eyebrows shot up at the sight of the ragged trio, but she masked her surprise with a brisk nod and quickly set to work readying a guest room. "Thank you, Luke." "I mean it," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He only nodded, his expression unreadable. Tonight she had a reprieve, but tomorrow he would demand answers, and perhaps uncover a chance to rewrite their past. The next morning, Luke invited Emily to breakfast. The girls giggled over fresh fruit and toast, but Emily barely touched her plate. The meal passed in strained silence. Once the girls had finished, Mrs. Amelia whisked them off to play, leaving Luke and Emily alone at the table. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "We need to talk," he said gently. "I need to know what happened to you." Emily looked away, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her napkin. "It's not something I want to relive," she murmured. "I'm not here to judge," he assured her. "I just want to help." He paused before adding, "Yesterday, I saw you and your daughters on the street. People don't end up there overnight." "What happened, Emily?" She inhaled sharply, her face tightening as memories rushed in like a cold tide. The late-night fights with Joshua, the eviction notice trembling in her hands, the hunger gnawing at her as she gave the last scraps of food to her daughters. Finally, her voice wavered as she spoke. "After high school, I dated Joshua Miller. You remember him?" Luke's jaw tightened. Joshua, a charismatic, manipulative man, a predator beneath the charm. "I do," he replied stiffly. "We dated after prom, and I thought it was real love. But when I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared." My parents couldn't help much, and I struggled alone. I lost my job, bills piled up, and eventually we were evicted. Since then, we've been living on the streets. Luke's chest ached at the image of Emily, the girl he once knew, full of life and dreams, now reduced to a woman fighting to survive. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time, there was a crack in his composure, a flash of hurt that he hadn't been someone she could turn to. "I was ashamed," Emily admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Especially of you seeing me like this, broken, with nothing left." Luke shook his head slowly, his heart heavy with regret. "Emily, you were never nothing. And you're not broken. You survived. You kept your daughter safe. That's strength, not shame." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but this time, she didn't look away. There was something in his gaze, something more than pity. It was a promise, unspoken but clear, and for the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Luke's words that night echoed in Emily's mind, but not with judgment. It was admiration, and it made her heart ache in a different way. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. He hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice steady but filled with truth. "Because I care. I always have." That night, as Emily tucked Amelia and Alice into bed, Luke's words lingered in her thoughts. A flicker of hope sparked inside her, fragile but real. Accepting his help meant confronting her fears, but for the sake of her daughters, she promised herself she would try. The next morning, laughter filled the mansion as the twins raced across the carpet in their new clothes that Mrs. Caroline had laid out for them. Emily watched, gratitude warring with unease. She didn't belong in this world of luxury. His kindness unsettled her, but for Caroline and Alice, she swallowed her pride. After breakfast, the twins darted outside under Mrs. Caroline's watch, while Emily lingered at the sink, scrubbing dishes just to feel useful. Luke appeared, shaking his head. "You don't need to do that," he said gently. "I can't just sit here," Emily insisted, her voice tight with the need to contribute. Luke sighed. "Fine. But first, do the girls need anything? Clothes? Shoes?" She hesitated, then admitted, "Yes." "Then let's go shopping." "No, that's too much," she said quickly. "I insist," he replied, a faint smile breaking through. Soon they were downtown. Caroline and Alice were darting through a children's store, each of them pulling colorful items off the shelves. Carolyn held up a sparkly dress with wide, hopeful eyes. "Can I have this, Mommy?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Emily answered, her throat tight with emotion. Luke watched them, a quiet satisfaction settling over him as he observed the light in Emily's eyes for the first time, the first spark of hope since he had met her again. The days that followed passed in a gentle blur, filled with quiet moments and small joys. The twins paraded around the mansion in their new clothes, turning every hallway into their personal runway. Emily found herself smiling more easily, the weight on her chest slowly lifting, though it was never fully gone. In the mornings, Luke would join them for breakfast, a habit that surprised even him. Emily caught his softened gaze as he watched the twins chatter about their imaginary adventures. His presence had shifted, becoming less like that of a host and more like a part of their small family. Yet behind Luke's easy smiles, something still unsettled him. He couldn't shake the thought of Emily's struggles, how someone so strong had ended up on the street, and who had left her to fight alone. The name Joshua Miller gnawed at him, a ghost from the past that he couldn't ignore. One evening after the twins had drifted to sleep, Luke stood by the window, phone in hand, staring out at the darkened sky. His reflection stared back at him, his jaw tight with unspoken resolve. He needed answers. For Emily, for the girls, and for himself. Days later, sunlight bathed the twins as they slept, safe and unburdened. Emily watched them, hope mingling with resolve in her chest. Luke greeted her downstairs with coffee, his smile easy and warm. "Now that they're settled, let's talk about you," he said gently. "Me?" Emily blinked, surprised. Luke made a suggestion. "What if you went back to school? I can't afford that, Emily said quickly, shaking her head. I'll cover it, Luke said firmly. Consider it an investment in your future and in the girl's future. Luke's sincerity broke down some of Emily's walls. After thinking for a while, she agreed. Days turned into weeks. Emily spent her mornings studying while the housekeeper cared for the twins. Luke had converted one of his offices into a study space just for her. Every evening he checked in on her progress, encouraging her after each small victory. With each lesson, a spark she thought had been lost was reignited. But one afternoon, Luke's expression turned grave. I found Joshua, he confessed. I confronted him for you, and for the girls. Emily stood up, her hands trembling. Why? She demanded, her voice rising. What did he say? Luke's voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed a hint of guilt. He knew you were pregnant. He left because it was easier for him. Her hands shook with anger as the truth sank in. Did he ask about them? She whispered, her voice tight with pain. Not once, Luke replied. Tears threatened, but Emily held them back. I need to face this myself. That night, Emily stood outside a rundown bar, her hands trembling as cold air bit into her skin. The neon sign flickered above her, casting a sickly glow on the cracked pavement. She hadn't seen Joshua in years, yet the thought of him made her stomach churn with a mix of rage and dread. As he stumbled out of the bar, slightly disheveled, Emily's breath caught in her throat. Time hadn't been kind to him, but the bitterness in her chest wasn't about his appearance. It was about the years he had stolen from her, the loneliness he had left her with, and the pain her daughters would one day have to understand. He blinked in confusion when he saw her, a half smirk tugging at his mouth, as if none of it mattered, as if abandoning her had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. You've got some nerve, Emily said, her voice cracking, but the anger burned bright beneath it. You left me. You left them. Do you even care what your daughters look like? Do you even know what their names are? Joshua shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her eyes. Look, Emily, I don't... She stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. You don't get to say my name like we're old friends. You don't get to make excuses. I'm not here for apologies because nothing you say will ever fix what you did. For a moment, Joshua just stood there, a ghost of the man he had once been, and for the first time, Emily felt as if she had finally found her voice. Joshua had nothing to offer but silence. Emily's hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms to steady herself. I just needed to see you, she said, her voice softer now, though the tremor remained. I needed to see for myself that you're still the same coward you always were, and now I can walk away knowing we are better off without you. She turned, leaving him standing there in the dim light of his own failures. Each step away from him felt lighter, as if she was shedding the weight of his betrayal. She didn't feel broken. She felt free. When Emily returned home, she found Luke and the twins playing in the yard. She took Luke's hand. It's over now, she said quietly. Luke nodded, admiration in his gaze. We moved forward without his shadow. He handed her a notebook. Write your goals. We'll plan together. Luke offered Emily a job at his company, a flexible position so she could still study. Nervous but determined, Emily accepted. The next day, Emily met Luke's team. They were welcoming, and though she was nervous, she tackled each task with determination. The house filled with new energy. The twins played happily in the garden while Emily worked, and Luke often joined them, growing closer to the girls each day. Their bond grew steadily, with shared glances and quiet moments hinting at feelings they were both afraid to name but couldn't ignore. During a team meeting one afternoon, Emily surprised everyone with a smart suggestion to improve a project. Luke's proud smile was impossible to hide. That pride deepened into something else. He stood beside her every step of the way. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Emily found Luke in the garden, lost in thought. Everything okay? She asked, sitting beside him. He smiled. Just thinking about how much has changed. They sat quietly, comfortable in the silence. Do you believe in second chances? Luke asked. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She realized how much Luke had become part of their world. His kindness, his belief in her. It all meant more than she could explain. She knew she was falling for him, but fear of getting hurt held her back. She lowered her gaze. Luke, I made a lot of mistakes, she said softly. Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve a second chance. No one's perfect, Luke replied gently. What matters is that you fought to rebuild your life. You deserve this and more. His words comforted her in a way nothing else had. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, Thank you, Luke, but I need time. I'll wait, Luke promised. There's so much more ahead, he added, his words warming her heart. For the first time in years, Emily believed a brighter future was possible. That night, lying in bed, she felt ready to leave the past behind. Luke was right. Second chances were real, and she wouldn't waste hers. The mansion soon filled with laughter and energy as Caroline and Alice made themselves at home. Even Luke, once all about work, found himself wrapped up in their playful chaos, feeling his bond with the girls deepen. Their joy was infectious, filling the house with warmth. In Emily's quiet transformation, she found herself embracing the love that had always been around her. Then one day a message rattled her. Do you know who he really is? Attached was a blurry photo of Luke sitting across from a stunning woman in a sleek dress. Her smile was just a little too familiar. Emily's fingers turned cold as she stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat, heart pounding painfully against her ribs. Memories she had fought so hard to bury came flooding back. Joshua's charming lies, the way his promises dissolved into excuses, the suffocating loneliness that followed. Her mind spun. Luke had been nothing but kind, patient, and steady, but hadn't she once believed Joshua was too? What if this was the start of the same nightmare? The warmth and safety she'd felt in Luke's home cracked beneath the weight of her fear. Every whispered doubt, every insecurity she thought she'd overcome, came rushing back louder than reason. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to trust. But the scars Joshua left behind made it almost impossible. Her hands shook as she put down the phone, her heart racing. When Luke came home later, he sensed her tension immediately. She showed him the message. It's a consultant, Luke explained. There's nothing more to it. Emily wanted to believe him, but her old fears had surfaced again. I'll find out, Luke promised. But Emily, you need to know. I'd never hurt you. Luke patiently proved his honesty, tracking the message back to a disgruntled ex-employee. He eased Emily's fears, but guilt still lingered. She still struggled to trust fully. That night, Emily went to Luke's office. I'm sorry for doubting you, she said softly. There's nothing to apologize for, Luke reassured her. Trust takes time. His kindness made her eyes well up. You make me believe I can be happy again, and that scares me. Luke gently wiped her tear away. You can be happy, Emily, he said softly, and you don't have to do it alone. Something shifted that night. Her walls finally began to fall. Their bond deepened, built on patience and care. One afternoon, walking through the park, with the girls happily playing at home, Luke watched Emily laugh with them, and in that moment, he knew this was the life he wanted. That evening, as the twins enjoyed their time together, Luke took Emily to the terrace, where so much had changed between them. There, under the soft glow of the setting sun, Luke pulled a small box from his pocket, revealing a delicate ring. I want to spend my life with you and the girls, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. You've brought joy into my world in ways I never imagined. Will you marry me? Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she gazed at him, her heart full of love and gratitude. Yes, Luke, I will. With a smile, Luke slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her close. The storm that had once surrounded them seemed to have dissipated, and in its place was a calm, unwavering bond. A new chapter was about to begin. That night, they dreamed of a simple wedding and a life built on trust, love, and family. In the days that followed, Emily focused fully on planning the wedding and building their future together. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at home. Not because of the mansion, but because of the love they had created inside it. Caroline and Alice, thrilled to be flower girls, eagerly helped with everything from choosing flowers to picking out dresses. Despite the hardships they had endured, they were now building a future filled with love and hope. On her wedding morning, when Emily walked down the aisle toward Luke, all her fears melted away. Their vows were simple, yet full of meaning, a promise not just to each other, but to the family they had created together. Afterward, the mansion felt warmer than ever, filled with laughter and love. Luke, once a lonely millionaire, had become a devoted father figure. Emily's journey, starting as a confident schoolgirl, then struggling as a mother, and finally blossoming into a woman who had rediscovered strength, love, and hope, was a testament to resilience. It showed that life is unpredictable, but the ability to turn pain into power is what makes us stronger. Luke's unwavering belief in her, despite their past, proved that sometimes second chances are not just possible, they are necessary. Despite every hardship, they were building a future filled with love and hope. Life at Luke's mansion had finally become complete. Once strangers brought together by fate, they had now become a true family, strong, united, and filled with love.